Good afternoon, everybody. A very warm welcome back to those of you who've been participating in this Climate and Energy Summit from the morning. Welcome to those who are joining for the first time on this session, which is very much focused on looking at what we should be thinking about in terms of COP26 and what world leaders will make of our in terms of commitments and policy announcements about our future. My name is Dharmendra Kanani, Director of various things at Friends of Europe, but also Chief Spokesperson, moderator for this session. As those of you who followed this summit, this is an annual event for us where we bring multiple stakeholders from various sectors and various disciplines to think about our climate change agenda and conundrum. We've looked at investment, we've looked at digitalization in the morning. I say this is about looking ahead to COP26. Before I go into our speakers and say a little bit about the kind of context for this, I want to introduce Joe, who is both available, you'll see him on screen, but also live here in the audience, who will be my co-moderator, helping us to make sure that we both include our online and live stream community that are also present. This is what we call a hybrid event. So we have those of you here live, and then we are obviously really pleased to have those of you online and watching us on live stream. And we'll do our best to make sure this is as inclusive a process as possible. But live with us. I just hope that so far so good. I shouldn't jinx it. Technology has been fine, but famous last words. But to just say that those of you online, Joe will keep an eye out. Those, if you wish to make a comment or raise a question, etc., do raise your virtual hand. If you don't know where that is, go to participants and you'll find it there. And I'd encourage everyone to use a Zoom chat. It's a really good way of engaging with each other. And also, if you have questions that I'm not able to get to, we can make sure they're passed on to the speakers in due course. And, we have a good track record of our contributors coming back to those of you who raise questions on the Zoom chat. Okay, so that's by way of the rules of the game and what we hope to get in. We have an hour, just under an hour now, actually, to have this conversation. We're blessed or, challenged to have 6 contributors, people who are really interesting. And so I've urged them to be concise because I want to be able to interact with you both in the room, but also online. And I'm not going to say a great deal by way of introduction because those of you who have followed these sessions will know what we're, from a think tank point of view, what our line is on this. And, I suppose in short, for us, we just want to see more action rather than words. We want to have measurability and accountability rather than glib press statements around how the world renews its commitment to climate change. Time is past for that, and we really need to see a different kind of leadership and I suppose much more dramatic tension in how we deal with markets, the public sector, and engage with citizens around really moving in the right direction with urgency. So I want to firstly invite our first contributor from the IPCC Co. Warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, it's a real pleasure. Your report, which everyone's been speaking about, there's been 2 reports that have been kind of really pivotal in terms of policy debate. There's your report, and there's also the World Energy Outlook report. Saying similar things from different vantage points. But you say code red for humanity. What are your hopes for COP26? Do you think it's going to be different? Are we going to see the same old, same old? Share with us your thoughts.
Sure. Let me just first say, it's clear that the scientific consensus on climate change that was reflected in our last report has alerted the world to the urgent situation we find ourselves in. And we know unequivocally that human activities have warmed the planet and have already caused widespread changes in the atmosphere, land, and ocean. And impacts from climate change are occurring on scales greater than we've seen in hundreds, and in some cases, thousands of years. And we're seeing these changes in every region of the planet. We know that the Earth has warmed already by 1.1 degrees C above pre-industrial times, and we will likely reach 1.5 degrees in the next 20 years. In fact, of the 5 illustrative emission scenarios we use to drive possible climate futures, every one projects warming to continue through 2050. And the science tells us that if we fail to take action to really reduce emissions, not just talk about it, we will surpass not just 1.5 degrees C, but 2 degrees by the end of the century. So while the window for action is narrowing, our report shows that it is still possible to keep to the 1.5 degree target by mid-century. We need widespread transformational action to have any chance to do so. But I will say I have hope. There's something about this moment in time. In the many interviews I've participated in since the release of the report and press I've read from world leaders, it does seem that they are listening to the science and engaged and motivated to increase ambition and take measurable action. There's momentum. I hear a chorus of voices committing to holding temperatures to 1.5 degrees, which is in and of itself stronger than the commitments that were made in the Paris Agreement. And many are targeting the critical decade to come for strong and lasting action. COP26 is a pivotal moment. The entire world is watching. I'm just a scientist and a citizen, but I have hope the conference will deliver and we will collectively rise to this challenge.
Co, thank you for that. What do you make of the leaks?
You know, the leaks always happen, and in some sense, it's unfortunate because the process requires ituration on the drafts. Because the drafts change, legitimately change, we'll continue as we always have for all the years and produce a robust and scientifically sound report to come.
No, sure, and I wasn't challenging you particularly, but the point, you're hopeful in your contribution, but fundamentally at the heart of this is trust. Trust in the process, trust in you, trust in those who are meeting next week, that actually they're not meeting with, their fingers behind their backs and crossing their fingers and saying, I may lie, but I'm telling you the truth to the face. And it's that moment of actually seeking to ensure that people do the right thing in the right time. And you're still saying that from your perspective, we still have time. You think the next 10 years, you don't think you should, are you thinking of pulling the timeline forward earlier even?
I think the IPCC reports have pulled the timeline forward. We put out a report that was requested by the Paris Agreement, actually, to put out specific information on 1.5 degrees C. We put that out 3 years ago, and I think that report has resonated with folks. And people are recognizing that this commitment to 1.5, it's now. There is no waiting. We have to be acting now. And I think, even for myself, who's worked on climate for my entire adult life, it makes it very real and tangible and present. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Co. That's really, really very helpful. Let's move to a politician. It's really good to have Eamon Ryan with us from Ireland, Irish Minister for Transport and Environment, Climate and Communications. I'm not going to ask you, obviously, because you won't divulge what your government's position is going to be in terms of the pre-briefing for, your leader that will be part of it. But what are you taking into those discussions next week in terms of, if you've been there before and you've watched this, do you feel a different kind of energy that's there for taking action more boldly, faster, and with a sense of urgency?
I would agree with Co. I was slightly pessimistic a few months ago, slightly less pessimistic in recent weeks, just in some of the run-up to this. I think there is increasing recognition that it's now. We have to act now. I think there's three things I'd be briefing my Prime Minister. We should put social justice at the start of everything. And I think to make the process work, that contribution to climate finance, the opening up the issue or looking at the issue of loss and damage is a first step, I think, to make Glasgow work. I think secondly, the whole transparency and just making this Paris Agreement, the rules around it clearer. And that just won't be just Glasgow, that'll go on into Egypt. The whole land use rules is in my mind, and how and how we help countries monitor and measure that. Second, transparency. And thirdly, ambition, the kind of keeping 1.5 alive is obviously the third key metric in terms of success coming from Glasgow. Can I be honest, and maybe this is typical from a national politician, I also think very much it's how does it influence national debates in 200 countries is very important. The metaphor I was just thinking about there, if you remember the Voyager spacecraft was sent out in the late 70s and went around our galaxy, and every time it went around a planet, it picked up energy and kind of it whipped itself along to the next planet. I was seeing COP in a way in Glasgow as hopefully similar to Paris. Paris was a similar moment when we went around Paris, and out the other side, there was greater acceleration in national ambition to act. So I hope Glasgow will be a similar moment where we use the energy from the event to really increase national actions now. And I could give maybe 3 examples just because they're on my plate at the moment. You know, what might that mean? I was in Ostend last week. We had a meeting of the North Seas Energy Cooperation Group of Ministers with our TSOs. And we agreed there's real urgency there to set up, for example, offshore hybrid systems where several countries would come together and put in the transmission connections and put in the kind of energy islands to share power. And even though it'll take us a decade to deliver that, if we don't decide now we're going to do it, it won't happen. So it's an example of, and so the energy from Glasgow might help that. Or similarly, just to look domestically, we're in the middle of finalising our common agricultural policy regulations. And again, you know, that's a difficult negotiations often with agriculture ministries. But if we don't get that right, as an example in Europe, and now it has to be decided. So using Glasgow as a help to get that. And lastly, I think I'm also transport minister, as I said. There's a moment now where coming out of COVID, we could go various ways, but we have to go in a way where we reduce the volume of transport, where it's not just switching to electric or switching to biofuels. And this is a difficult thing to do politically, because to do that best, we have to restrict road space, and that's happening coming out of COVID. Cities like Paris or others have shown examples. So I hope that Glasgow can be used get that energy to give political commitment at home. And this could be down to the most simple, getting public commitments to putting in a cycle lane or taking out a car lane. And it's those very practical examples. We may need to make sure that Glasgow helps us domestically to make those changes now. Sorry for being very domestic about it, but that's where the action will take place. And Glasgow being a success to help those sort of things happen in the next 6 months, in my mind, is one of the key things we should be getting out of it. I hope we get out of it.
I mean, thank you. That was refreshing. Thank you. I mean, you know, you've been very direct in terms as a politician, but you've also given very concrete examples about what this means in your backyard, but also the elements of cooperation that, you know, on the which really point to a really positive development. It's a shame that, you know, on the common agricultural policy, where there could have been genuine leadership on, let's say, climate change, we saw basically a snooze button on the issue, or basically let's just go back to where we were. We didn't see any transformation at all, where there was an opportunity for Europe to lead in renegotiating, redefining the common agricultural policy. And actually, therein lies the rub. Your positivity and the opportunity that politicians can create, and they do create, but where it matters, where there's a rub actually in terms of systemic change, CAP, for example, there was a shying away, and in effect, vested interests, the too difficult box, and actually what will we do with votes became the drivers of change. I'm not asking you to respond to that at all, but just a little letting off a bit of my passion and steam on that particular issue, because it's one that could have changed a lot. I'm going to move on to Karsten. Karsten, thank you very much for joining us. It's a real pleasure to have you with us. Again, providing potentially a domestic German perspective, but you know, you've been on the side of, you know, negotiating COP for many, many years, and we'd be really, I think all of us would be really interested in understanding your perspective on this particular COP26. You know, As the chief negotiator for Germany over many years, do you see this as being different? And in particular, Karsten, what would be helpful, because to understand from your perspective, is the role of industry? Because we've been having this discussion about how important industry is to this agenda. So a real pleasure, and over to you. You're on mute. I hope it's not our end.
No.
Great.
Sorry.
No
problem. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I can just go on where Eamon left us, because I fully agree with his picture. Where do we stand in time now? Climate neutrality by mid-century, or net zero, is a new normal, more or less. That's accepted. Therefore, it's about implementation and strategies for implementation. Therefore, the focus of Glasgow is not just negotiation, but is helping us to implement. And about net zero or climate neutrality, it's not just targets from countries, but it's also from industries. So we need, for me, three things from Glasgow. The first one is we need to be more ambitious. So many countries must enhance their NDCs. So we in Europe and in Germany and in Ireland are pretty much well up, but we need to engage others to do more. The second one is that new level of ambition needs to be underpinned by concrete sector-based initiatives. And therefore, we have a steel initiative or a car initiative in Glasgow. Third one is we need more long-term clarity in concrete terms, not just the target for 2050, but what does it mean you need to design trajectories. And that's the task of each and every country and each of every company. And Glasgow could help to creating the momentum that you're not alone. But also, and that's important for developing countries even more than for us, but we saw that in Germany with the floodings as well, we need to get more detailed adaptation strategies. That's the first point. The second one is we need to achieve greater solidarity. The financing is still not that great internationally. We as developed countries haven't fully delivered on the 100 billion target, which we promised already in Copenhagen. So we need to find clever ways to help developing countries in also becoming climate neutral. And I think we as Europe are the biggest contributor, but still we could do more as well. And so therefore we have pledged to increase our just budget money from 4 billion to 6 billion annually by 2025. And the third one is there are still some smaller pieces of the Paris package not concretely defined. Eamon rightly mentioned transparency is important, that countries and companies can be compared. So transparency we need common timeframes. Every 5 years we need to live up to ratchet up our ambition. Therefore, common timeframes is important. And the third one is cooperation mechanisms, how to trade emission reduction units, which is an important field for industry as well, is important. Role of industry. Industry, and I think, has moved tremendously over the last 5 years. Many of the German, European, international companies have pledged climate neutrality by 2050. Boston Consulting and other groups are just consulting on how that could be done. And what we need for companies to help them is three things. First, a clear price signal. That's what we're doing in Europe with carbon pricing. The second one, we need to help them to creating the new markets. For example, we want to have contracts for difference with the steel sector. And thirdly, we need regulation inter alia also in the car market.
Are you hopeful for next week?
I'm hopeful for next week because how could you explain that more than 130 heads of state and government want to go there? They do not want to go there if they see a failure. If they all come, we get a bigger attendance than even in Paris. And I think that's important. It's not just climate and energy ministers like us or officials. It is heads of state and government who have to take this commitment on board, and they will do so.
Good. Let's hope. I want to back your sense of optimism, and let's hope that we do get a different deal and a different outcome, rather than when they have previously met and ended up with revisiting, old hashed up statements about, we renew our commitment to climate change. Let's hope that's not the case. I want to open it up to the floor now for contributions and queries, vent your passion or frustration on this agenda, both online and physical. Gentleman here, could I just have the mic? Of course.
Yes, my name is Diane, so I'm a consultant in European affairs. I would like to know about the United Kingdom since the Brexit. Do you think that their ambitions is lower or higher than the EU about the climate changes? Thank you.
And what's, I suppose, what's behind your question? What's the purpose? Why do you want to know?
I would like to know if there could be a change in their attitude since they left the EU. And if they can, for example, be in line more with the United States ambitions or still continue to follow our EU ambition, or if it's separate.
Okay, I'm not sure which one of our speakers I'll direct that to, actually, because it's a difficult one. But, wow, okay, Karsten, please.
Yeah. I think, while, of course, I'm unhappy that US left the Union and we have some rows with the UK, we haven't seen a diminishment in ambition on the UK side on climate change. And I think they have done a tremendous job in preparing for the COP, and the national legislation probably is somewhere there where they would have been in effort sharing terms within the European Union. So for me, climate change is a field where we can very well cooperate with the UK, while the divorce negotiations are not that easy in other fields.
Can I add to that if I can, just very briefly? I mentioned that we were in Ostend last week discussing North Seas cooperation. Mm-hmm. The United Kingdom is connected on a tectonic plate which will not sail off into the Atlantic or the Pacific. The United Kingdom won't sell too much electricity to Singapore or New Zealand. And as we all know, electrification of everything is central to decarbonisation. So one thing is increasingly clear. The UK will not be able to decarbonise if it's not in cooperation with its neighbours in the northwest of Europe. And also we in the northwest of Europe, along with Britain, will not be able to decarbonise without their being involved, particularly for Ireland, obviously, that they're our big neighbour. But climate requires cooperation, and electricity decarbonisation requires interconnection. It's a big balancing system between variable supply and variable demand, and balancing doesn't work when you take a big country like the UK out of the North Sea. So I think we will, and the agreement on Brexit is actually quite good on energy. That chapter is actually quite progressive, and if we can overcome the political problems at the moment, I think we will have to engage in that cooperation for both European and UK needs.
Eamon, well said. Thank you very much for reminding us. There's been a consistent theme about the interdependency of the system, whether that's domestic, regional, or global, that we need to constantly remind ourselves about, and you make that point extremely well. Thank you. We have a gentleman here. And then I'm going to move to the online audience so you don't feel left out.
Larry Moffet with the Press Club Brussels Europe, and also the citizen movement Rise for Climate Belgium. In recent weeks, leading up to the COP, we've seen in the US one lone US senator from a state with a population not much more than Brussels, blocking Biden's climate plan and ultimately succeeding in watering it down substantially. Here in Europe, all it takes is one or two member states to prevent the council from being unanimous. So how can we prevent one or two bad guys from holding the entire planet hostage? And so at the COP, for example, what if Australia or some other country decides that they're not going to sign to some global agreement? How do we overcome that?
Very difficult question. I want to, there might be views in the room. Who would like to have a go for? We're getting good value out of you, Karsten. Thank you. Please do. And I might bring the French ambassador in also, and Eamon in that regard as well. Go on, Karsten.
Probably Mauro is a good one as well later on. So on that one.
No, I'm saving him to later. That's okay.
Yeah. I think our industry going and moving ahead means securing market of the futures, but they also need to stay competitive today. And therefore, it is important that we help industry in stemming the first investments. Therefore, the idea of the CBAM, a carbon border adjustment mechanism, is a good one if designed in a cooperative way. In negotiations, I think it is public pressure. We don't have a climate police. So if a country decides not to do it, they always pay a price. They can just delay progress, but they're not doing it. I'll give you an example. We had no strict compliance mechanism in the Kyoto system either. But when the then conservative government of Canada decided to move out, you could see that their reputation internationally was largely damaged.
Great, thank you. Stéphane, can I ask you to come in on this one and share your view? French ambassador.
Yes, thank you very much. No, it's really a question. It boils down to one word, really: persuasion. One of the weaknesses, but also one of the strengths of the Paris Agreement is precisely it's a universal agreement because everybody does what they themselves set what they're going to do. They set themselves the goals, and then it's really a question of everybody looking at what every country does in terms of how they fix these objectives. So really persuasion is the key word, and it's something that works within the EU. I mean, we all know that we have difficult conversations sometimes among member states. We have, it's no secret that we have often difficult conversations with Poland, but in the end, everybody's on board, and we have managed as the EU to come up with extremely ambitious goals, and I'm very confident that we'll be able to come up with the delivery plan on with the Fit for 55 on that commitment that we're making. So both weakness and a strength, in fact, to have to all agree.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure how I share your characteristic about how Europe just is able to get it together when I think about Poland and Hungary in recent times. But that might just be my personal view. But let's hope we can get Poland and Hungary online and moving in the right direction. Joe, very briefly, I want to bring in the online community before we move back to our speakers.
Yes, very, very quick, because the discussion online is also mirroring the discussion in the room, so it's nice.
Great.
So comment from Antoine, who's so basically this question of trust, it's one thing to get the commitments, but then countries need to be held to those commitments. So Antoine says, while companies are subject to binding laws, countries have a different approach. A French court recently condemned France for its inaction on climate. Could this be a new way to keep pledges in check? Of course, this was a French court ordering the state to honor its commitments on climate change earlier this month. And then we had a comment from Joe Leinen, who's a former MEP, who asks, how do we deal with China regarding transparency on climate data? I think Stéphane says everyone looks at what every country is doing, but what if the data itself cannot be trusted? And then finally, Karsten talked about public pressure, and just to remind participants, also on the live stream as well, if you log on to the EU Climate Pact, we'll put some links in the chat. You can also commit to raising public awareness, to kind of putting public pressure onto policymakers, because ultimately, if there is that public pressure, it's going to force, hopefully, the idea is going to force action. Over to you, Dharmendra.
Thank you very much. I'm sure the remaining contributors and others can contribute or respond to some of those points. I also want to bring in Michael Franz from GIZ. Michael?
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much. My name is Michael Franz. I'm a team leader at GIZ in a program called GET.invest. I would like to bring in an additional perspective here, and that's the perspective of our cooperation outside of Europe, in particular with developing countries. So our role is we're a European program for mobilizing investment in clean energy, in particular in sub-Saharan Africa. Which leads me to my point, and that is of the relevance of the two issues mentioned in the headline with regards to the external dimension of Europe, of the European Green Deal. So cooperation and competition, they are also very important concepts in that regard, with regards to our international partners, in particular our neighborhood, and perhaps especially so with regards to sub-Saharan Africa. Europe's cooperation with these countries, as we all know, will be absolutely essential. The investment needs, in particular in those countries for the green transition, are enormous. And it's even harder for those countries and the actors, also private sector in those countries, to mobilize the capital. So European capital and European know-how can and will add a lot of value. And that is especially true for a real partnership with opportunities and benefits for both sides. At the same time, and that is something that I experience in my day-to-day work, I've been doing this now for 15 years, we're in a competition with international players. It's a competition of ideas, of economic models, and it's also a competition for specific investment opportunities that are associated with the green transition, and more broadly speaking, for important future markets. And that's the point that I wanted to make, the importance of the external dimension of the European Green Deal, of Europe's cooperation with our international partners. If we play this right, it can indeed go very well for and also with Team Europe. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
No, a pleasure. And, you remind us of that dimension that we rarely consider, but what has been raised actually throughout is about the interdependency point and about actually how we use either development aid or international, financing through the IMF and others, and in terms of supporting the countries that are least resilient, have the least access to vaccines at the moment, and don't have the infrastructure. And, we talk about a one world approach. So thank you for that time. However, from my background research, I've been told the Gambia is the only country in the world that's online to meet the Paris Agreement targets. Go figure that. So that's good to know. I'm going to move on to our remaining contributors. And Claire, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you. Thank you for joining us. And it's good to have you with us.
Hello.
Hi.
Very good to be here as well.
Excellent. You're a like EDF previously. You're a major energy provider. What do you see the role of industry, and yourselves in this conversation that we're having in terms of moving to a climate neutral Europe? What role do you see industry and yourselves playing in that regard?
Yes. Hello, everybody. Very happy to be the only private sector representative around the table in this panel. But this is very much, I very much concur with what has been said. We need targets, we need actions to back them. And for us to succeed in the COP26 and in the years to come, we will need joint action, both by governments, the European Union, and by corporates. On our side, at ENGIE, we are a big energy provider with a very large European footprint. Of course, France, Benelux, but also Germany, Italy, Spain, Romania are big countries for us. Our first contribution to fighting climate change is to reduce our own footprint. So we have committed to carbon neutrality on all three scopes by 2045. And this comes against a background where we've already demonstrated our ability to halve our emissions until now. So first contribution is do our homework and contribute to the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Second contribution, we are also a provider of solutions for other actors, be they corporate or be they cities, communities. When I say providing solutions, it's twofold. We all know that fighting climate change requires energy efficiency, that's one. And that as an energy provider, I think it's important to stress it. So we do provide solutions to reduce energy consumption. And second, greening of energy. And in this respect, two examples. We are the #1 green PPA provider, and we very much believe that green corporate PPAs have an important role to play in ensuring green providing of energy throughout time to corporates. That's one. Second, we are very much active in district heating and cooling, which are also a very good way to decarbonize for cities and communities. Last thing I want to share is that, and I think it's probably obvious for all of you, but we as a corporate cannot act alone, and we don't act in isolation. So we do need strong public action for us to be able to act. And here I will very much concur with what has been said. We need targets, but we need actions to back them. What we need to achieve together is an affordable, resilient transition to carbon neutrality. This in an environment where relative prices of energies vary a lot. So we need to make sure that we take the best advantage to the knowledge we will accumulate through the years to make sure that the transition is resilient and affordable. What does this mean? This means probably having a mix of energies available. That's one. Second, it means also making sure that emerging technologies can indeed emerge. And here I'm thinking about the role that green hydrogen could play. We do need a framework that's able to effectively support green hydrogen. And last thing, we need to be pragmatic in what we do. And here I want to say a word on taxonomy that will be important. We do need both public investment and private investment to effectively channel the energy transition. That for obvious reason. I mean, whatever the public contributions, they will not be enough. We need private signal. Carbon price is one signal, and we very much think that it should be widespread. Taxonomy will also play a role. And here, when we think of very carbon-intensive, coal-based economies in the EU, and there are a number of them, we have to recognize that gas is a transition energy that will enable them to decarbonize and is critical along the path. So that's my key points. We corporate can do a lot, but we do need a framework that's supportive.
Claire, thank you very much. That was really clear, and I interesting framing about gas as a transition energy. Not heard that a lot in today's conversation. But thank you for bringing that thought-provoking notion to this discussion. What do you want from the EU?
What we do hope from the EU, well, there are very important discussions right now. One is carbon pricing. We do think that carbon price is a very powerful tool to make corporates and to make households and cities and communities make the right choices about their decarbonization. So we do hope that we will have an extensive price signal in the EU. We do think that this price signal has to, we have to be mindful not to distort the economies. Hence, we do feel that there is a role for a well-designed adjustment mechanism at the border, carbon border adjustment mechanism. And I think Stéphane is going to discuss this in a while. That's one thing. Second, we do think that it's very important, as I was saying, to channel investment into the emerging technologies. And we do hope in hydrogen in particular, that the framework will be pragmatic enough to make sure that we kickstart the investment in this domain, which we see very promising. We do need to kickstart the production. We will need infrastructures that do back this increased role of hydrogen into the economy. And so these are very important decisions and discussions by the EU in front of us.
Thank you very much. So you gave way to Stéphane. Stéphane, let me bring you back in on the and very much appreciate your comments, Claire, because I think they were well made. But in terms of your perspective, in terms of competition, and is there do you feel it's we're doing the right thing in Europe in terms of either being more strategic, autonomous strategically, which has a number of implications in terms of protection and looking at one's own backyard, but also is there an issue here about how we maintain the EU's credentials of innovation in terms of green green innovation, but within different parts of the EU. Over to you, Stéphane.
Yes, thank you very much. These are indeed key questions. But maybe let me start perhaps by reminding everybody that the European Union has managed to show to the world that we can decouple economic growth and the reduction of emissions. And since 1990, the EU and France have reduced their emissions by over 20%. And at the same time, we've increased our GDP by over 60%. So we have shown that it is possible. The thing is that we've only done 20% or a bit more than 20%, and we now have another 30% to over 30% to do within the next 9 years if we want to keep our promise to keep emissions under reduction of emissions by 55% by 2030. So it's a huge challenge that we're facing. And in order to meet that challenge, we're really putting legislation in place that will allow us to meet our commitments. And that's with the revision of the ETS sector, the carbon market. And Claire was saying that the industry wants a good price signal. Well, I think you will get a good price signal. Because remember, with the ETS, back at the time of the Paris Agreement, we had a carbon price at roughly €5 a ton. And now it's hovering around 60 euros a ton. And that's even before we've added more stringent rules to the ETS sector with the future directive that we're going to introduce as part of the package Fit for 55. So here, I think the carbon price is set to go up, even more, and that certainly will encourage industries to divest from fossil intensive energy to more decarbonized sectors. And then we have all this other slew of legislation that's coming up, the effort sharing decision, the CBAM, famous CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Why do we want this introduced? And France was really, I remember at the time of the Paris Agreement, we were knocking on the door of the Commission saying, this is a great idea. And the Commission at the time was saying, no, well, let's try and make sure that ETS works, and let's think of that another time. And now with the new Commission, Ursula von der Leyen taking it on board and making it one of the flagship legislation piece of the package, CBAM basically is trying to put a level playing field on the environmental issue. We do not want carbon leakage by allowing products that are produced with high intensity of emissions to flood the European market against products that will have had extremely stringent rules on the European market. So we feel we need to introduce that carbon border adjustment mechanism. It's going to be a long discussion within the EU before it's actually introduced. There's a lot of pushback from other countries who feel it might be unfair competition. We insist on the fact that it's going to be foolproof in terms of WTO regulations. And the pushback, what's interesting in terms of the pushback from other countries, I'm taking one example is Russia. They would be quite impacted by CBAM, but it has triggered within Russia a discussion on whether they should introduce their own carbon pricing and own market. Why should they pay the EU when they could have revenues for their own government? So that discussion has taken on in Russia, and that is exactly what we want. And then what should Europe do to remain at the forefront of green innovation? Well, research, development, and I'm taking one example that's green hydrogen. We all know the huge potential of green hydrogen. The EU is very interested in it. France is very interested in it. We're going to put 9 billion euros in green hydrogen over the next 10 years to try and develop first electrolyzers, 6.5 gigawatts in France by 2030. We want to push the drive for heavy mobility with using green hydrogen. And of course, research and development is key to try and drive the price down of green hydrogen to make it more on a par with what currently is grey hydrogen, i.e. made from fossil fuels. So there's this great push for innovation that Europe can will do to try and be at the forefront of climate change. Thanks.
Great, thank you for that. And I share, I think many of us share the opportunities that we have for innovation, but there isn't, not necessarily, but it's about how do we make sure that that's scaled to a degree with speed, so that it can help us now into the future rather than waiting or letting other continents really scale up some of the genius ideas that have come out of Europe. And basically US has been brilliant at that because of its system, has been able to really, let's say, fast-pace the notion of scaling up ideas. But that's not I'm not going to ask you to come back on that, but you've shared what I think is the views on terms of how we should be thinking about the ways in which the tax, but also other systems can work to enhance our industry. And I want to thank you for that. I want to now move to our final contributor, and that's Mauro. Mauro, thank you very much for joining us. You've been very patient.
Thank you for inviting us.
No, it's a real pleasure.
And thank you for putting me in the interesting position where all I can do is to repeat something that others have said. So I'll see what I can repeat and still make sense.
Not at all, because that's assuming that I'm going to ask you that you know what I'm going to ask you, and you don't. So no, I'm kidding. Obviously, reflect on what you've heard, Mauro. But one of the things that has been repeated consistently throughout this conversation and this summit is the role of industry. Okay, and are we moving fast enough, bold enough? I know you're the Director General of Climate Action, so this is a question about the kind of horizontal nature of climate action. Are you working with colleagues to create a very different policy on industrialization for the future?
Well, the starting point is the question that was asked earlier about how can we bring on board those who are recalcitrant? And Stéphane talks very rightly about persuasion, but persuasion has to be linked with another P, with prosperity. I think if we don't have a policy which decarbonizes the economy, which is where the problem comes from, but is not also a policy of prosperity for countries, for individuals, for economic operators, we will fail. Prosperity and social justice are the two core elements before anything else that bring this policy forward, and we have to invest in that. So at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves what in this policy can make our economy more prosperous and more effective. And energy efficiency is a key point. Our industry hasn't been too bad in improving its technology to bring more energy efficiency. We are running out of it. We're running out of improvements. So the real question, back to the point you were debating with Stéphane on innovation, I agree with you. The real issue European industry has is not innovation, is not knowledge, is the ability to deploy that knowledge and that innovation in the market.
Exactly.
And we cannot afford to let the markets develop entirely on their own. It may happen, but certainly not with the speed that Cole reminded us early on we need to have. So I'm confident industry is going in the right direction. European industry in particular is on the verge of a major renovation of its productive structure. It has to move to technologies which are much more energy efficient if they want to remain competitive. What's their choice? Is business as usual? Are fossil-based technologies a good business for European industry, even in terms of just running a business? Quite apart from the fact that much of European industry is increasingly convinced that they have a role in society, they're part of society like everybody else, and they have to do their part. But even without that, So I think I'm quite confident. The issue is, how can we help them? And there are 2 points. One is exactly, again, the point you made, Dharmendra, deployment of this technology. How can we make sure that the first innovator doesn't go bust? The saying is the first innovator goes bust, the second maybe breaks even, and the third makes money, if there is a third. We can't afford to wait for the third. How do we support them? And we're putting together a number of instruments, beginning with the Innovation Fund, which, if our proposals are approved, could end up being worth something like 50 billion euros over 10 years. Which, you can do some interesting things with that. But then we also need to create the market conditions. On renewables, we've been very successful, but it's taken a long time and a lot of money and a lot of trial and error. Can we do things faster? Can we create the kind of market support for green steel, for green hydrogen, that can be withdrawn when the public intervention is no longer necessary and the market can walk on its own legs? I think that's the big challenge we have on industrial policy in Europe. And that gives you also a very modern, very competitive industry. And it's not by chance that the people who come and talk to us are not just European companies. They are American, Japanese, Korean companies implanted in Europe. They want to be part of that picture as well.
Mauro, thank you for responding to that so effectively. And it's good to know that whilst you didn't say it, but there's a clear case to be made that the industrial strategy that was, or the policy that was, identified a year ago, is not really the one that's going to see Europe through into the next 10 years. And it's time for a makeover or a fundamental redesign. But I know that's not your portfolio. But clearly, that industrial policy has to be at the heart of moving us towards a greater climate neutrality. Finally, if I may, I've been asking this of all other contributors as a kind of glide path into the conclusion of this summit. Share your thoughts, and I know you can't be political, and you have to mind your words. But tell us, in the confines of this lovely little summit, what are your thoughts on this, COP26? You're a seasoned operator. You've seen things move and shake up and down. Do you think this one's going to be any different to the previous ones?
Let me just add one gloss to what you said earlier. Look at our strategies together. Policy coherence is the holy grail of public policy, and has been in the Commission as well. If there's one thing that's bringing policy coherence around the world, that's climate policy. That's not climate policy, actually. That's climate change, and the havoc is wrecking with everything that we're doing. So we are getting there. So look at these things together. And don't forget that the subtitle of Clean Planet for All was a modern, competitive, climate neutral and prosperous Europe. So, these things do go together, and you can't look at just one piece of paper that Europe produces and have a coherent picture these days. COP. Look, I'm more optimistic than I would have been a couple of months ago, because a couple of months ago, I was asking myself 2 questions. What is it really that we want out of this COP, apart from finishing the few negotiating bits that have been mentioned earlier and that we hadn't done in Katowice? But more important, Madrid had charged COPs with an almost impossible burden. I mean, the expectations of the people outside the COP in Madrid were very different, much higher and much more radical than what was happening within the COP. I was very afraid that would reproduce itself and would blow the whole thing in pieces. I think the British presidency was extremely helpful in that respect. We now have a goal which is linked to science, linked to the goals of the Paris Agreement, and linked to what we're actually doing to get there. The idea that the COP should come out having lined up enough ambition, enough action, and enough money to be able to say we are on track for 1.5. We're not there. We're not doing all that we should be doing to be confident, but we are still on track. The objectives are alive. More needs to be done, and we can do it. If the COP comes out with that overall message, I think that is a reasonable expectation from this COP, and a high ambition one. So I'm reasonably confident it can be done. As for optimism and pessimism, when it comes to negotiation, I've given those up decades ago.
I will imagine.
We can do it.
No, absolutely. And I think there's many in this room and online who believe we can do it. It's just that it's what the politics we may determine of the bigger players or the smaller players and what gets in between. And thank you for that very useful reminder in terms of in response to my comment about industrial policy. And you're quite right. Absolutely, there is that coherence, and climate change creates that. I just think that what we're hearing from business players in particular is they want faster movement, better enabling environments to work, but also greater evidence of a single market operating, both digitally and in other regards. If we're going to trapeze our way into a different kind of climate settlement into the future. But thank you all for sharing your thoughts. It's been a privilege to have all of you online, but also here in the room. And I want to thank all of those who've been participating, both in the individual sessions, but also today. But I would like to, Joe, would you say a little bit about the climate pledge, the EU climate pledge, the pledge we can end on that positive note of, the sense of the change one can be.
Yes. No, in fact, I'm going to end on the question that we opened, that we framed the debate with. We had a comment come in on the Zoom chat from Eileen, who asks, how can we ensure minorities and the poor in countries won't be left out or taken advantage of with the introduction of green energy sources into households, as their implementation might not be affordable straight away for some communities? And Mauro said in his intervention, prosperity and the just transition must be at the core or we will fail. And we opened with the importance of just transition, and I think it's important to close. And then the EU Climate Pact as well. If you watching online or in the room, if you all the details will be on the website with the video accompanying this event, and you can click through to a link and you can pledge and make a commitment, because we do. It's an uncomfortable conversation. It feels provocative. But we do feel it's going to need a whole of society approach, which is government, industry, and consumers as well, and ordinary people. And so everyone does have a part to play. Thank you very much.
Joe, thank you, and thank you all of you, those watching us live stream, those online, and those of you here today. And I can see some of the faces you've come for the distance. Thank you for that. We respect that for all three sessions. And those of you who came for this one, I hope it's been rewarding and a helpful use or useful use of your time. We will be obviously putting this some of the key messages from this on our website, and you'll also be able to watch some of this online also. But thanks to all our contributors again, and it's been, as I said, very thought-provoking. I hope it's stimulated us to move in the right direction, and for all of us to play our very small part as we lead up to next week. We'll all be watching with bated breath, and let's hope the leaders don't disappoint us, eh? That's the only thing we can hope for, really, can't we? And some of the people that are in different parts of the world will say, let's wish them good energy. Let's hope that's the case. So thank you all very much, and see you again very soon. We have next on the agenda this week, we'll be having a major discussion if you're interested on biodiversity in an Asia contract. So we will be there's details of that on our website, and if you're interested in that, join me on Thursday again here, same place, and the details of that. It's online. I'll be here, but it's online, and look forward to seeing you. So take care, and thank you all very much. See you again.